Hello, in this video I'm going to be going through the OCR Cambridge National's IT exam from January 2020. This exam has got the unit code R012. And in this qualification, the exam is worth 50% of the final grade. The other 50% comes from the assignment. Before I start going through it and start writing my model, so to speak, answers, I would really suggest you try and do this paper yourself if you've got access to it, because you watching me do it is not nearly going to be as helpful as if you did it yourself in fake exam conditions, then you watch it afterwards to see how you did. At the time of recording, there aren't many past papers available for this course, so it's important you maximise the ones which are available. I should say this paper is out of 80 marks, and if you do go through it and you are marking your work, which I'd really recommend, you want to then add up the number of marks to see how you did. And in order to see your grade, you need to be looking for grade boundaries for this course. So to find grade boundaries, the grade boundaries are what is telling you how many marks would have got a certain grade. You can just Google Cambridge National's grade boundaries for the exam series. So this one here is January 2020. They'll be different each year, so make sure you type in the correct date, which is on the front of the exam paper, and then it should come up on OCR's website. You then want to try and find the IT Cambridge National. There's quite a few on different subjects. So whereas IT, let's go down a little bit. Ignore ICT, that's the old course, but IT is what we're looking for down here, and you can see what grade you would have got had you got so many marks in the exam. So in this exam, 60 out of 80 marks would have got you the highest grade, which is Distinction Star at level 2. So you can drop quite a few marks in this paper. Don't go into it thinking you can relax and drop loads and loads of marks, but it isn't quite as strict as some other exams you might be doing. So if you can't do one or two questions, that's nothing to panic about because you have got some leeway here. And you can see at the bottom end of the scale, to pass this exam, you only need 16 out of 80 marks. Now, hopefully you'll be aiming for much higher than a pass at level 1, the equivalent of roughly a 1 in GCSE, but we can see how it scales up from here. You don't need that many marks in order to get a pass in this qualification, although like I say, hopefully we're aiming towards more of the top. And if you try this exam yourself, or while watching this you are really confused and don't really know what's going on, I would recommend watching some, if not all, of the videos I made which cover all of the theory content for this exam. It's a very long playlist, 7 hours in total, and not always the most exciting information, let's be honest, but it covers all the content required, and there is a textbook available. The textbook's not incredible, you may find it useful, but hopefully these videos will be useful and they do cover all the content required for this exam. I'll put a link to this playlist in the description. Okay, so going back to this front page of our exam, there's not too much to point out really, apart from that it's worth 80 marks, and also to say that the time allowed is 1 hour 45 minutes, which is quite long for an exam you'll be doing in either year 10 or year 11. Compared to other ones, usually it's much shorter, well not much shorter, but a little bit shorter. And that's quite nice actually, because it will feel like a long time in the exam hall, but it's good because with 80 marks, generally we recommend to spend about a minute per mark available. So you're not spending 5 minutes on a 1 mark question, you're not spending 2 minutes on a 10 mark question, so roughly a minute a mark, which gives you here 1 hour and 20 minutes. If you are following that fairly strictly, of course you can spend longer on some questions and shorter on other questions, but it gives you quite a lot of time then to check. So you've then got plus 25 minutes to check, or as contingency time, right, in case you run out of time, you've got 25 minutes to spend finishing up any questions. Really important to check your work for, that's so important. Okay, right, moving on to our first question then in this exam paper. So the first section is made up of short mark questions, so usually 1 or 2 marks, just testing your recall really. So they're not applied to any particular scenario, they're just testing you have learnt different bits and pieces on the specification. So first of all, you need to identify the correct order for the phases of a project lifecycle. Sort of thing you should be learning off by heart. First of all, we have initiation, then planning, then execution, and finally evaluation. So therefore C is our answer for the first question. Question 2, a pivot chart is used to visually represent data. Is this statement true or false? So a pivot chart is one of the few charts you need to know about, but all charts and graphs are there to show data in a visual way. They're not just text data or data in a table. So therefore this statement is true. You might have used a pivot chart in a spreadsheet software. It's really there to take just a section of your larger data set. For the third question, we are asked to identify 2 advantages of using consumer panels as a method for collecting data. Just quickly on exam technique, right? An identify question just means you've got to just write down an advantage. We're not explaining it here. It's only worth 2 marks, so we get a mark per advantage. don't need to explain it in any way. So a consumer panel is one of our different methods for collecting data. We've got a sensor, we've got email, we've got interviews, questionnaires, and so on and so on. I forget the exact list. But a consumer panel is where we have a group of people meeting, usually every so often, so maybe every few weeks, maybe 3 or 4 times over a period of 6 months. They're meeting to give feedback about a product or an idea. So one of the best things about having a consumer panel, having this group of people meeting directly in front of you, is you get instant feedback. Whereas if you did, say, a survey which is sent off, maybe a paper-based survey sent off, you don't get feedback straight away. That's a good advantage. Also, we can say maybe because these people have agreed to sit on this panel, we usually get good engagement. Meaning we get many people, the people who are meeting here will all give their feedback. Sometimes you might send off a survey to 1,000 people and only get 100 replies. So you've got good engagement, good interaction in this group of people. If this was a longer question, we'd have to explain these, but that's fine for just an identify question. For question 4, we need to, again, identify legislation that relates to the misuse of personal data. Legislation is another word for a law. And there is not a specific list of laws you need to know about, but really the ones I'm thinking of are Computer Misuse Act, Health and Safety at Work Act, Copyright Designs and Patents Act, and finally the one which is about personal data is our Data Protection Act. So the one which has data in its name. You could also write GDPR because the Data Protection Act is really the UK's version of GDPR. This is a European Union law which the UK has kind of implemented as the Data Protection Act. The other laws I mentioned don't really apply to personal data. For instance, the Computer Misuse Act is about stopping hackers, essentially, but the hacker might access your data, but it's not about actually misusing the personal data necessarily. It's more about the act of breaking into a computer. For question 5, we need to identify 2 outputs from the execution phase of a project lifecycle. So in execution, we are actually doing our project, we are creating our system, we are making our product, whatever we are doing in this project lifecycle. And this is really a case of you learning the outputs. But you can start to think about it, right? If we actually are doing our product, making our product in this phase, what are we going to output into evaluation? We're going to output the actual product. So the phrasing we use to be correct is our deliverable product or system or whatever it is. We say deliverable because we're delivering it to a client, is the idea. Also, we're going to output some test results. I think a lot of people often forget we are doing testing in execution, not evaluation. So we have test results which will get passed to evaluation. We could also say the results from an iterative review or a phase review. So we do this review, we look back on what was good, what was bad, and we summarise it, and it goes forward to evaluation as well. Of course, you'd only write 2 down if you did this for real. I realise I wrote down GDRR, it's GDPR. Anyway, moving on to question 6. So we need to complete the sentence by circling one of A, B, C or D. Unauthorised access to systems with malicious intent to steal, exploit and sell data is called phishing, ransomware, grey hat hacking or black hat hacking. Well, the key word here is malicious. So all of these are related to security and all of these are threats to people. But the word malicious suggests we're being especially nasty, we're trying to cause particular harm. So that rules out grey hat. So grey hat hacking can cause harm, but there's some sort of ethical reason behind it which makes it not quite as bad as black hat hacking, which is what the answer is here. So the answer is D. We can also rule out phishing and ransomware because phishing is not about selling data necessarily. In fact, well, it can be about selling data. It's not about unauthorised access though necessarily, because the person you are sending that phishing email to is sort of giving up the data, but you're not kind of breaking into it. And ransomware is not about is not so much about stealing or selling data. Usually it could be, I suppose, but it's usually not. It's usually just about getting a ransom, getting some money in order to unlock some data. So the answer is black hat hacking. A and B, it's a little bit more nuanced, but the answer should be D. Okay, for question 7, we're told that Progress X is an IT company that uses social media to promote its services. A lot of OCR's made-up companies are called Progress something for reasons which are not massively clear to me, but just bear in mind. We need to identify 2 benefits to Progress X of using social media to promote its services. So it's one of our distribution channels. Social media is one we could choose. So why do you use social media? Well, loads of things we could put, and I'm sure you can kind of use your own knowledge of social media in order to Think about it, things like Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Snapchat, and so on. So I think a good benefit is a wide audience, a wide target audience. Many people use social media because it is an identified question. We don't need to explain this in any more detail, but we have a wide audience, a large number of people using social media who would be able to view this promotion. I also think, because we're thinking about benefits to this company, the cost is quite important, right? So most social media platforms are free, whereas if they say built a website to run this promotion, that would cost money to run. You can also say things like you can connect directly to people, you can get instant feedback, you can grow your fan base in a sense on social media, all things you could put down for this question. Just going back to exam technique, say you wrote down more benefits than it asked for. Say you wrote down a third benefit. Say you wrote first of all that it's faster, which I can imagine some people thinking, which it's very fast if you post a message on Instagram or something like that. It gets out there very quickly, but that's not really unique to social media, right? If you post a YouTube video or you post a blog, it's still getting out there really quickly, so we can't really say it's faster, just as an example. But say you were writing down faster than our 2 points down here, you would not get 2 marks in this question, right? Because the examiner is marking your first 2 responses. So if you're just listing loads of reasons in the hope that you have 2 correct ones, that is not a good technique to do because you won't get marks for it. So only write down however many reasons it asks you to write down. Okay, don't write more than what it states in the question. Moving on to section B of this exam. Now the sections will be based on a particular scenario, which means you've got to then link to the scenario where you can. The questions will start to be a little bit longer, not just 1 and 2 marks, which is usually what you get in section A. Section A should not be too hard if you've spent time revising properly, because it's just about recalling what you have learnt. So our scenario, first of all, for section B, spend a minute or 2 reading it. You might want to highlight anything you think is important. So this company is called Progress Gaming Zone. It's a business where gamers can purchase time to specialist computers with high-speed internet connections. Gamers can then play a range of online multiplayer games. Gamers will be given a unique username and password to access for specialist computers. I might be thinking about highlighting this because you can think, well, security, there could well be a question on username and password, well, that's good maybe. We're told they will collect data about the amount of time gamers spend online, so we could highlight this as well, thinking maybe about the law, about the Data Protection Act, about what data is being collected, and it's about this amount of time. We are told their network manager has been given a project to develop a system that will be used to record and monitor online usage. The new system will automatically create invoices for gamers who use the specialist computers, again thinking maybe that's an important detail, being automatic in this process. Head Office has requested a monthly report on the trends in online usage by gamers and the generated income. So a report, again we could be thinking LO6, what presentation methods could we have for that report? Okay, so first of all, we are told this PGZ network manager will set smart objectives for the project. What does the S stand for in SMART? Well, we can do this all. We'll then ask for the A. So S is specific, A is attainable, we're up to M is measurable, R is relevant, and T is time. We could also say for A, also achievable is also fine. Okay, we now need to identify 2 smart targets that could be set for this project. It's only worth 2 marks, we don't need to write loads and loads here. And having highlighted stuff is now helping us because we can look at what specifics are mentioned in this scenario. You've got to make sure it's specific to the scenario. So we could say monthly report is a good one. It gives us some time every month. So we could say every month a report should be created. We could also, what else could we say? We could say anything I've highlighted here really. We could say each account is given a unique username and password. Okay, we don't actually have a time here because it will just be really when they sign up, we'll be given one straight away. So we don't always need to fill in every letter in this acronym. If you give generic answers here, like saying, okay, we're going to do a phase review, I'm going to do some testing, that's not specific to the scenario. But we are told this PGZ network manager will carry out a phase review at the end of the initiation stage, our first stage in this phase. So doing a phase review is important, it's just not a smart target. Is it true or false? It's definitely true. We always do a phase review at the end of every phase. The slight exception might be evaluation, because evaluation is really just a big phase review. But you can still say true for that one. Right, moving on to question 9, we must identify one storage method that PGZ could use to store data about the amount of time gamers spend online, and we must justify the method you've chosen, so saying why we chose that one and not another one. So here we have really two categories to choose from. We've got the cloud and also we've got physical storage devices. So you could mention the cloud or physical storage. I think let's be a little bit more specific. Let's say a particular type of, let's do physical storage, why not? It could be any one, just as long as you justify it. Let's say we're going to pick magnetic storage. So let's say method is going to be magnetic storage, and we could give an example of what exactly we mean, just to be super clear, e.g. maybe a HDD, a hard disk drive. So a hard disk being a type of magnetic storage that goes inside a computer. And you have to know a bit about this particular storage device, but I would say a main advantage to a magnetic storage device is it has a very large capacity for a certain price. So justification could be it has a large capacity, and that is 1 mark for stating a point. And we've got 1 mark for the method, so to get our 3rd mark we must explain why this is important for this scenario. It's not just saying generally it's good. Large capacity, therefore link it to the scenario, therefore many users could be active and have their data stored on this device. We could be more, loads of reasons you could say, so really any justification here is fine. I wouldn't ever mention cost, to be honest, because cost, is not the primary objective. If you've got money, you then want to choose which device you want to pick. Cost is not important so much when we're just learning about the properties. So mentioning things like capacity, durability, scalability, full cloud storage maybe, and so on, reliability as well. Look, those kind of words we want to use when we are justifying it, and always linking it to our scenario, really important. And for question 10, we were told already that gamers are given a unique username and password to access these specialist computers. We must describe how having both of these can reduce the vulnerability of the specialist computers. So a vulnerability is a weakness which can be exploited by an attacker. So if there weren't any username and passwords, if there was no authentication, then anyone could just turn up and use these specialist computers. So the idea being that to use the computers, you must know the password and also I suppose the username too. Therefore, remember we're describing it here, so we're kind of stating our points in a chain. Therefore, only legitimate gamers can access it. Right, the gamers are given a username and password. If we didn't have a password, anyone could just turn up and use these computers. We want it to be some restriction is the idea, some limitation of people who can access it. So maybe to be more clear, to be sure we're getting our 2 marks, we could say not, and use a good keyword here, unauthorized, not unauthorized people. So someone who's unauthorized doesn't have access to that password, they're not allowed to use the computers. And having this authentication means they can't just join and use it without permission. So our 1st mark comes from our 1st point. You must know the password to use the computer, showing you've understood what a password is really. Not hard at all, but you've got to write it down, state the obvious always. Our 2nd mark is for saying why having a password reduces the vulnerability of these computers. Why is it good to have a password? Okay, and for question 11, we've got a very fun one here, a 10 marker. So you will get some longer mark questions in this exam paper. So we're told this network manager is preparing for monthly report on online use and income generation for head office. He will create an integrated document for this purpose, and we must discuss the advantages and disadvantages of using an integrated document for this purpose. Before we get stuck in with discussing the pros and cons here, let's mention what this is. So integration as a word means we're putting stuff together. So we're putting components together is the idea. So if you've done the assignment, hopefully you will have done some integration already, where you're combining different documents inside one document. So for example, you might be writing this report in, let's do blue for Microsoft Word. So you might be doing a word processor, and you might be including maybe a graph on this income maybe. You might have some graph which is being integrated, being embedded from, say, Excel, right? So some spreadsheet software. You might be embedding this inside Word. That is what is that's what an integrated document means, right? So Word is now an integrated document because we've got another application's data inside our main document. Okay, so for 10 marks here, how many points do we need to make? That's the first thing we might start to think about for this question. We might even do a little plan of how we're going to write this, because a question like this is not marked as in if you make 10 points, you get 10 marks. You must discuss these advantages and disadvantages. We've also got to make sure we say both. We can't just focus on the advantages. We must discuss both fairly evenly as well. And it says advantages plural and disadvantages plural, so we've got to make a few points. I would suggest we want to aim to make maybe roughly 5 points, which are each explained, right? So we can't just state a point, we need to explain it, and importantly link it to scenario. Now, this might be a little bit overkill, and if you can only think of 4 points, that's balanced if you're doing 2 of each advantages and disadvantages, but giving 5 points will kind of give you enough content so the examiner will feel more confident giving you 4 marks, or close to it ideally. So in terms of some advantages and disadvantages, just do a quick plan. You may not feel you need to, but this is not an easy question, so you may want to take a minute or two to plan it, just quickly before you write it up properly. I'll do this to one side probably if you were doing this, so the examiner doesn't get confused. But advantages, we could say, well, having this embedded means you've got some, you've got this live connection. So we've got a live connection, meaning if I update my chart in Excel, it will also update in my Word document. That's good because it saves time. We're not copying content. We only have to actually make our chart once, we're not just copying it across every time. We could also say what is good about it. Info will kind of support each other, right? You know, if you're writing in a Word document, including a chart from somewhere else will kind of back up what you're writing, hopefully, if you're doing it properly. But what's not so good, maybe we could say things like, sometimes having different sources, say you've got 4 different applications embedded in one, can cause information overload. It also can cause an issue where it's quite like it might slow down the application because it's having to connect to different applications. If you've got a few bits and pieces embedded, you could also say things like we need a connection. You know, if you're having this embedded system, we've got to connect it together, and we may have issues with compatibility. Right, if you're trying to embed, say, an Apple product into a Microsoft product, it may not work completely. So these are a few things to get started. We could easily think of 5, take 5 out of these as our points. But let's start to now write it up. So let's take my first point about data being kept updated. So we can say data embedded, another word for integrated, will be kept updated. That's our point. But now we can say why that's good for this network manager. So the manager does not have to manually change the data in both documents. So it won't be marked like this, but this will hopefully give us a couple of marks. The examiner won't be ticking off points, but just roughly, that will give us a couple of marks, hopefully. So that's an advantage, and we are saying why it's important, and we're linking it to the scenario by saying it's the manager that's going to be affected. But we said the issue of this live connection could be compatibility issues, and also the connection needs to be maintained. It might get lost. And what effect could this have? Well, it can mean the data included in this integrated document is not the latest. So it could mean outdated information is included in this report. And to fit in another sneaky disadvantage here, we could also say about that compatibility problem. We could say this could also be caused by incompatibilities. And what that means is the software may not work together, it may not be designed to work together. Okay, so that's us stating our point. We must now explain what effect this might have on our network manager. So we can say this could mean errors could be produced, or also potentially this connection might be an issue, so maybe the information is not live, we could say, or information is not shown live, which kind of defeats the point of doing it really. But we could say having this successful integration means the manager doesn't need to keep updating, keep copying the information. In fact, we kind of said that already, didn't we, actually, so ignore me. What else are we saying as a positive? You're saying the information can, so having multiple sources can help support the content of the report. So having So I've said it helps support the network manager's messaging. You know, if he's written about improved income and then he's got a graph underneath showing this improvement, that helps support it. I could write this out fully if I wanted to give that example, but also it will help hopefully make it clearer for the readers, or make it easier for the readers, because it's all in one place. But we were saying earlier that potentially we could have this overload, we could have too much information in one place. So we could say, but there may be too many objects, which is really what they're called when we have like a graph or a picture from another bit of software. Too many objects in one document, causing confusion and information overload. Okay, so what's the effect of this project manager? Well, maybe the messages may be lost. So the messages may be lost, as in what he's intending to get across may not get across because there's too much stuff going on. Okay, so that'll probably do us for this question. I've run out of space at least, which is always an indicator of how much you need to write. Don't always take it too literally though. So I mentioned I wanted to make 5 points, and I've really made 4 going back and forth, but I did sneak in a second disadvantage in this paragraph down here, I suppose. So the idea is linking it to the scenario and explaining your points. Always state the obvious. I probably could have given more examples here, but we're not doing this for real, so I'll forgive myself. And make sure you're trying to make a fairly balanced answer, so include roughly the same advantages and disadvantages, and like I say, always link it back to the scenario. And always roughly work on the assumption that you want to be making it half of how many points are available, how many marks are available, because you'll be stating a point, then you'll be explaining it, which will give you 2 marks, and we're going to do this 5 times is the idea. Okay, moving on to our next section. So we're given a new scenario per section after section A, and that's also where you've got about 25 minutes of spare time at the end of this exam, or spare time I put in air quotes, because you're meant to also read the scenarios and digest them. That'll take a minute or 2 each time. So for this one, we've got a taxi company called Pro Taxis, which is used to pick up customers and take them to their destination. Customers will phone PT to make a booking for a taxi. This data is currently recorded on a paper schedule plan, so it's recorded on paper. That could be worth highlighting, because they've started a project to digitally collect, store and sort data about customers and their bookings. Digital means making it on a computer. So PT is also looking into using mobile technology by developing a mobile app for customers to book a taxi rather than phoning PT direct. So I'm sure you've used or are aware of companies like Uber who have apps for booking taxis, like this one they're developing. So to register to use the mobile app, customers will have to enter their phone number and their name and address. So the kind of like types of data here, we have to enter a phone number and their name and address. So first question in this section, PT has decided to use a database software application to store customer details. This will allow PT to query customer information and produce reports. So query is another word for searching, really. So searching for particular customers, and a report is a summary of the data in that database. So for A, we must identify 3 data types that will be used in this database software application. So a data type is a category of data, so things like numeric, alphanumeric, text, object, boolean, etc, etc. So under numeric, for example, we've got loads more like integers and so on. So here, thinking, a phone number, we could put a phone number could be stored, probably not as an integer actually, but a phone number could be stored as text. You could store a phone number as text, and also a name and address would be text as well. We could also put, maybe we've got, it doesn't say much else, but we could say about their age. You can imagine an age being stored, so they're over 18, for example, so that might be an integer, a whole number. And finally, we could have maybe a boolean value being stored. For example, one of your columns in the database could be a new customer, and it might be true or false. Maybe a new customer gets a discount, whereas a returning customer would have false and wouldn't get a discount. So that could be something stored in this database. You could also say any of the other ones that I mentioned there. There's a few on the specification. Now we must explain 2 reasons why a database software application would be more appropriate than a spreadsheet software application for storing customer details. So we've got to make sure the reasons we put here are different to ones which also exist in spreadsheets. So for example, you can sort in a database, but that's also in a spreadsheet. You can also validate in a database, you can also do that in a spreadsheet. So it's got to be unique to a database. So what is unique is what I mentioned above actually about querying. So querying is searching. You can do it in spreadsheets, but it's much more clunky. So a query is definitely a good reason for using a database. So we could say queries can be written, if I can spell it right. Queries can be written to find the word is records, a record being a kind of a row in a table, to find records based on certain criteria. And we don't need to actually, but we could, to be on the safe side, add an example, e.g. a customer's name. Right, so if you're looking for a particular customer, we can add a query and put the name of a query, and it will take out the record which applies to that customer's name. What else could we say? We could also mention, it's kind of given us actually reasons already. So we can also, where is it up here, mentions about reports. So where's, actually it mentions down here about reports. So a report, as I said earlier, is sort of where you summarize data and you present it in a slightly more appropriate format than just a table. So we could say reports can be generated, which means created, and also crucially stored. They don't just go straight away, and stored, which we could say allows analysis. We could say summarize data, analysis to be done when required, right? So you don't have to do it immediately. You can save a report and you can do that analysis whenever you want to, and it's quite easy to do actually as well. There's not really an equivalent feature in a spreadsheet. The only other key difference I would suggest writing is also about relationships, right? In databases, if you are creating a relational database, you've got two tables and there is some relationship between them, there's some connection, right? So maybe you've got customers here as one table, maybe you've got journeys as another table. So a customer can take multiple journeys, and so having this relationship between the two tables is nice and organized. It keeps things much more organized, and it allows more complex queries to be found. Like you can select a customer who has made a journey on a particular day because you are able to query both tables, but only because we have this relationship connected between them. You can kind of do this in a spreadsheet, but it's not nearly as designed for that purpose as a database is. For part C, we must identify and also describe two drawbacks, which means two disadvantages, to PT if inaccurate data is entered into the database software application. So really importantly, we're saying to PT, so it's not general here, we're giving specific answers to this particular company, which we know already is this taxi company. So what are some issues if we have inaccurate data entered, the data being things like the name and phone number of the person, also the address is quite important for a taxi company, right? So first one could think of might be, if a wrong address is entered, the driver may not know where to go. And this will cause issues, right, for a taxi company. It's fairly fundamental for their purpose. So the description of why this is a drawback is this may cause, or this may lead to bad reviews of the company, right? If your taxi driver doesn't know where to go to, you're not going to be very happy. Bad reviews affecting the reputation of the company. So we'll always link it to the business when it says something like drawbacks to the company. We are also told one of the bits of data is a phone number. So therefore, if you've ever taken a taxi, you might know the driver will often call you when they're turning up. And if we don't know the phone number, if that phone number is incorrect, we cannot contact the customer. And what could be the effect of not contacting the customer? Well, maybe some journeys may have to be cancelled. We could say may have to be cancelled. Why might they be cancelled? Because the person cannot be found, maybe. So for this question, there are lots of different reasons you could have put down, which would have been totally correct. It's just always making sure you are stating your point and linking it to the scenario. If you give general answers here, why it's bad to have inaccurate data which is wrong, that's just not good enough, unfortunately, for what is a fairly businessy question and isn't that related to IT, to be quite honest, but it's still always linking it back to this scenario. You've also got to always make sure you are stating the obvious, right? You cannot leave it down to the examiner to interpret your point, right? The examiner may realise why you've written down the customer may not be able to be contacted as a drawback before they're going to say why it's a drawback, why it has this negative effect on PT. For question 13, we must identify two success criteria that PT would need to consider when reviewing the effectiveness of a mobile application that customers use to book a taxi. So when we are writing a success criteria in initiation, we are really writing some statements which allow us to later on in evaluation to see how well we did, how successful our project was. So for this mobile application, we're really looking for what things need to be included that will be positive for this company. So by effectiveness, right, in this scenario, we really mean, how easy is it for customers to book on this application and get a taxi and go to their destination. So we could put maybe as a criteria, we could say how many bookings are created. So we could do this as a question. If we only have a few bookings created via the app, then that shows it's not very effective. If people are still calling up, that's obviously not effective because the app isn't very good in that case. Another good performance measure we could think about might be how many journeys are completed. It's all well and good if you are able to book a taxi on an app, but if the journey gets cancelled because the address is wrong or the sat nav doesn't work or something like that, then clearly it's not very successful. We want to know how many journeys are actually finished with the app. Do they need to call up midway through because there's been some issue? We could also talk about feedback. Have we got good feedback from customers? How long does it take to make the booking? How many people have downloaded the app in a certain amount of time? And also generally just, does the app work, right? Are you able to book a taxi using this app? That's fairly fundamental to this whole project. These don't need to be framed as a question. We're just looking for ways we can test later on how good things have gone. We're told now the IT manager needs to test this app, maybe using the criteria we just wrote. And we need to identify 2 phases of the life cycle which include the test results. We said right at the start the testing is done during execution, after we've made our app, of course, but also it's an output from execution with test results, therefore it will be used as an input in evaluation, right? We'll be looking to see how well testing is done. Has testing showed we've met our success criteria? Might be one of the things we write in evaluation. For question 15, we're told testing was successful, which is good, and the app can now be used by customers. A customer is using the mobile app over a public wireless network when PT server is hacked, which is not so good. We must identify and describe one possible consequence to the customer of a cybersecurity attack. So, and this is worth 3 marks in this case. So you've got to think about, well, first of all, we're focusing on the customer, not focusing on PT itself, so a person using the app. What could happen if the attacker has hacked the server? Or maybe the attacker is able to access customers' data. Maybe the attacker is able to install malware via the app. Maybe the attacker is able to remotely control the phone via that malware. So lots of things we could say. That's not a complete list. I think a nice, simple, obvious one is to say, well, maybe the attacker is able to get access to personal data. So the consequence could be personal data could be viewed by the attacker. So what kind of data could get leaked in this case? We could say, e.g. the address. And how could that be used by the attacker in a negative way? Could be used to locate the customer, which could put them into danger. Right, I wouldn't want some attacker to know where I live. We could also say things like they could steal it to get or to commit identity theft. We could also say they could steal bank details, which would lead to loss financially for the person. As long as you are describing it and giving an example is a good way to get another mark. As long as you are describing it fully, you would get those 3 marks. For part B, we need to identify one action customers could take other than not using a public wireless network to reduce the risk of a cybersecurity attack on their mobile device. So loads of things we can say, loads of prevention measures we can mention. Antivirus software, we could say encryption, which is really what not using a public wireless network means. Using a wired network which is encrypted, or a private wireless network. We could also say keeping software up to date and patching software. I think let's keep it really simple and suggest having a strong password is always a nice one to write about, which is quite simple. So action, setting a strong password on the device. Because if we had a weak password, what do we mean by weak password? We mean ones which are too short or common or use well-known information. Like if you've got a pet dog and it's all over your Instagram, you could use that dog's name as your password. It might be quite obvious to guess. So our justification would continue by saying, well, this would mean an attacker could easily guess password and gain access to the device. So you could say many more reasons than this. It's just one I thought of, quite a simple one, which is a good one to use. In terms of how an examiner would mark it, you're thinking, well, first mark is for giving an action, which is legitimate, and your other two marks coming from, well, explaining it. So I've given an example here, that's always good, and we are saying what the effect could be if it is weak. So we are kind of continuing our chain of argument and giving two distinct points under our justification. Okay, moving on to section D, so we can forget all about our taxi app. Now looking at this electricity company called Progress Utility, who supply electricity to over 2 million customers. They estimate how much electricity it needs. If it underestimates, there will not be enough electricity for its customers. A decision has been made that PU will launch a project to install smart meters, which are physical display units, in its customers' homes to collect hourly meter readings. The data from these smart meters will be automatically sent back to PU, and the data will be processed, allowing PU to, first of all, make more accurate estimates as to the amount of electricity it needs, and provide its customers with accurate utility bills. So it's all about trying to prove accuracy, it seems like, from these smart meters, and also it should be an automatic process, it says above. And we're going to follow the life cycle at all times, which is good to know. Okay, right, let's see how we can apply this. First of all, we're told one input for the planning phase will be the feasibility report, and we must identify and explain two benefits to this company of using a feasibility report for this project. Okay, so a feasibility report is a document made during initiation. That's why it says it's one input for planning. And this whole document is there to see if this whole project is even possible, right? Feasibility as a word means, well, if something's feasible, it means we are able to do it. So first of all, having time set aside where you're thinking about, is it possible? How much will it cost? What resources do I need for this project? Is, how can we put this into a sentence? Well, it just allows us to decide if the project is actually possible to do. And the benefit of this is, or the explanation of why this is a benefit is, well, I mean, you don't want to waste time doing a project which is not possible. You don't want to get to execution and decide that actually it's not possible for you to make this system. So we can say it means time and money is not wasted doing a project which isn't realistic. Okay, so we need to add another benefit here. Really, this is the whole purpose of a feasibility report used up in our first benefit. But to maybe get more specific, we can mention money, right? So part of this report is deciding how much it will cost if you are able to do it, and to see if it's within your budget. So it allows, when I say it allows us, I really mean it allows PU. You've got to be probably more careful writing that. So it allows PU to calculate, or should probably say estimate how much it will cost, which will allow them to decide if they can afford to do it. If you're anything like me, you've got a building site near where you live which has just been going on for years and years, maybe hasn't been finished for years and years, usually because they run out of money mid-project, because they hadn't spent enough time doing a feasibility report, and possibly they can never afford to do it in the first place, they just didn't spend the time actually analysing it. For question 17, identify one software type that PU could use to schedule the work of individual project team members, and justify the software type you've chosen for this purpose, for 3 marks. So by software type, we mean things like database software, presentation software, word processing software, desktop publishing. What have I forgotten? Did I say spreadsheets? I can't remember if I did. Also, project management software. So we could say project management software here. In fact, let's just do that for the sake of it. Project management software. Probably what I would have written down if I hadn't said that last would be spreadsheets, because spreadsheets are quite good for scheduling. You might have done it in your assignment where you've made like a Gantt chart in a spreadsheet software, something like this. That's what it means by scheduling. So project management software is quite specialised for the purpose of scheduling. So it can be used to set up the tasks. So it's put in full sentences, it can set, so you can, let's start that again. We can assign tasks. It can be used to assign tasks to individuals on the team. So you can add in tasks to the software and put a name of someone who's actually going to complete that task, and also set Timescales for completion, that's part of what scheduling is, right? Timescales for completion. And what's often good about the software is you are able to share this schedule, so the schedule can be easily shared. I think the only other real software type you could probably get away with saying here would be spreadsheets. Like I say, making a Gantt chart, you can store the tasks and the timeline and so on. Anything else doesn't quite fit, to be quite honest. So project management software or a spreadsheet is probably the most suitable for this purpose. As long as you are explaining it with sort of 2 points, that will be should be enough for the 3 marks. Okay, for part A of question 18, we're told the data from the smart meters will be sent to PU. That's really their purpose, of course. And we must describe how this data becomes information. So really this should hopefully be sort of just recall, because we can think of it as kind of a equation really. Information is just data which has been processed, but we're adding in that processing, adding some context, or we are adding some structure, or we are adding some meaning, right? So any really one of these 3 or all of them will cause it to go from data, just these raw unprocessed facts, to information which has this context and meaning and structure. So let's just say the data is processed to add structure and meaning. We could also say adding context as well. Context being just background information, right? So you look at the numbers and go, okay, well that is somebody's electricity reading. Whereas before, if it's just a number on a page, we don't know what it refers to. Okay, and we're told that the smart meters will increase the reliability of the collected data. So we must describe what is meant by the term reliability for 2 marks. So reliability of data is one of our 3 sort of properties of information, alongside validity and also bias. So if data is reliable, that is to say that it is consistently accurate. So the data is consistently accurate, meaning that over a long period of time, we can start to trust those readings to be as they should be. We're not getting every so often data which is completely out of a normal use. Customers won't be happy if their bills are suddenly massive because this smart meter is not being reliable. And the way we know, this is really just 1 mark here, the way we know data is reliable, we know it is being consistently accurate, is by comparing it to some other source. So the word we can use here is verification or verifying. So we can verify our data as being accurate by comparing it to another known reliable source. And by source, I mean another device which can measure electricity readings in this case. Maybe you are comparing it to the old meters, are the readings the same, and are they the same consistently over a period of time. Now we need to identify 2 considerations PE must take into account when holding customer data. So this is quite open, this question. I think first of all, if you're holding customer data, there are certain laws, certain pieces of legislation which we need to take into account. In particular, the one regarding customer data is the Data Protection Act. So we could consider what requirements the Data Protection Act has. We could have been more specific when I write that point by saying something like, well, we could also consider how long we're holding the data for, also consider how we are allowing customers to access it or edit it, those sort of things which are covered under this law. But that's okay, I think, for this point. We could also say, on a similar but different consideration, we can consider security. If we are holding customer data, we need to make sure that data is being kept secure, not only because the law says we must do, but also because our reputation will be damaged. Maybe our company won't be able to function if we have that data being leaked by an attacker. So we want to consider how we can securely store the data. In other words, what prevention measures are we going to put in place to make sure the data is being held secure? We've got another long question for part D. This one is 8 marks this time, not quite as bad as the 10 marker from earlier. So PU has completed the installation of smart meters into the homes of its customers. Discuss the benefits and drawbacks to PU, in particular to this business, of introducing the smart meters. You must refer to different types of vulnerability in your answer. So, a vulnerability is going to be linked to a drawback because a vulnerability is a weakness. We also have got different types of vulnerability. So we've got our 3 categories are environmental, and we've got also a system, and our third one, which is all listed on the specification, is physical. So these usually apply to cybersecurity, and so we could of course mention cybersecurity vulnerabilities which fall under these categories, but also it's more general, why is installing these better and also bad potentially for this company. So it's not about customers, it's about the company itself. So environmental vulnerabilities tend to mean things you can't really control. So things like fires, things like floods, all of these would obviously destroy a smart meter, which is really just a little computer. But if I'm doing a little plan here, you don't have to. I always think it's a good idea. Like I said earlier, don't do it in the actual body. Try and find some spare space somewhere else if you are going to plan it, and just jot it down. I'm just doing it so you can see my thinking. In terms of system vulnerabilities, in terms of like positives, I suppose, for the environment, well, the whole point of a smart meter is to be more efficient. So we want the idea of having fewer greenhouse gases, so less climate change, right? Instead of having a old-fashioned meter which would not measure things accurately and not be as efficient. System vulnerabilities are weaknesses regarding the device itself, so the smart meter itself, and things like what it can be. So personal data could be at risk. But a positive could be its accuracy, as I mentioned earlier, or reliability, I think was what it said in particular. That's a positive, not a disadvantage. And physical are regarding people actually getting near the system itself. So I guess it could be tampered with is a risk of smart meters, right? Someone might try and change their smart meter to get a lower bill. It could also be stolen. But we haven't got many benefits here, so I should probably go back to the scenario because it would have said a few things I might have missed about smart meters. So maybe this automatic process, that's quite good. It makes more accurate estimates and more accurate utility bills. So it does say if it underestimates there will not be enough electricity for its customers, which would obviously be quite a big disaster. So having smart meters might make it less likely that happens. I guess that would fall under system. Okay, so let's try and write this up into a more coherent form as opposed to a spider diagram of sorts. So just to be clear, if you are going to plan your answer, which I'd really recommend you doing if you have time, don't do it on the actual answer space, what I did just now. I'm lucky that I can delete it. I would do it really quickly in the corner maybe if you are doing it for real, and just jot it down. So to get the top mark for this one is out of, remind me, 8 marks. To get the highest band, as an examiner would call it, we must talk about both these benefits and drawbacks, and also you must draw on some context regarding how it is specific to PU and their smart meters. And likewise, it says we must refer to different types of vulnerability. We must talk about system, physical and environmental to show we have understood that point. Okay, so first of all, let's start with a benefit. So I'll just do this in green because why not? I can, as a positive point. So a benefit is, first of all, what it kind of told us already in the scenario, is this increase in accuracy. Okay, but this is slightly restating my point. So why is it a benefit? State the obvious maybe. Well, the benefit is that PU are not going to be undercharging, for example. Remember, this is all focusing on the company itself, not on their customers. So undercharging, what's it meant to be an R? Undercharging would affect the company by not getting enough money in. If their readings are too low, then it may mean they're not getting as much money as they should. And also, it mentioned, I believe, about the efficiency increases. So, and we could say, and electricity can be supplied more efficiently. It knows exactly how much needs to be supplied to each house, to each place. But a negative point we talked about regarding, let's do a system vulnerability, is this risk of a security problem. An old-fashioned meter without any network connection does not really run a risk of getting hacked. It can't get hacked if it's not connected to a network. But a smart meter which does have that network connection is runnable in that way potentially. So however is a really good link word. However, a system vulnerability is that we could be at risk of a cybersecurity attack. Okay, so it could be at risk of a cyber attack. There could be hackers maybe trying to gain access to a meter. So why is this bad? You've got to explain your point, otherwise you're just not adding too much to your answer. So why is it bad for the company? Well, this could affect their reputation, of course. No company wants to be victims of a cyber attack and makes them look really bad. And like we talked about in our previous answer of Data Protection Act, there is a law saying you must protect personal data. And so if the data was, say, leaked in an attack, that would fall foul of that law, that would break the law, and they might get fined. So what I've said here is if this personal information of customers was exposed, was accessed by an attacker, the company may be fined as a result of the Data Protection Act. So I could have maybe rephrased this more clearly, but hopefully that gets the idea across. Hopefully you can also see how I have tried to explain my point. I've not just said up here it's about the security, I've said why it would be bad to the company if they got attacked. So let's go back to a positive. It's always good to kind of flip-flop, I would say, because it shows you are taking the question seriously. We said earlier about a positive regarding the environment. So it's not an environmental vulnerability, but it is a positive aspect regarding the environment about this greater efficiency. So environmentally being able to, and let's try and go back to the scenario to see what it says. Environmentally we want to make more accurate estimates. The issue being, if you're not able to make accurate estimates, you might, for example, turn on a polluting coal-powered power plant when actually you don't need to. So you want to be accurate so you can correctly, you're not wasting electricity. Being able to not, should we say, overestimate the amount of electricity needed will reduce in it being wasted. So not only will this save a company money if they're not burning more coal or turning on a nuclear power plant for no reason, but also it will be good because if it is something like coal, it will have that polluting effect in the environment. So what I've said is, I want to make sure I've written it coherently or somewhat coherently. So being able to not overestimate the amount of electricity needed will reduce it being wasted, and this will save PU money by only generating what is needed and reduce pollution. Now, probably the company doesn't care massively about pollution, but they will care if customers are being put off the fact that they're not really trying to reduce pollution. So they could say this could be positive for their reputation. So we're kind of going a little bit off IT here. It's kind of more businessy really, and a bit of geography potentially. So let's go back to IT by adding one last negative point regarding an environmental vulnerability. We mentioned about things like floods and fires could cause damage to the devices. So let's just do floods because they are electronic devices. So we could say, not great to start a sentence with but we can do. So but the electronic smart meters could be affected by environmental factors like flooding. And we could be more specific by saying will be damaged by flooding. And again, saying why this is bad to the company, don't assume the examiner knows what you're talking about, state the obvious. So this will be bad because they have to pay for replacement meters, and also maybe wrong bills being how could I say, wrong bills being generated. The idea that if they're not working, they're not going to get accurate readings, obviously. So generated, as that's what that should say. Let's just double check this answer. Always really important to read over your answers because even me, when I'm trying to concentrate on it, I don't always make sense and I might leave stuff off. So I think what's really important is I've not mentioned all three of our vulnerabilities, which if you had time and space you could do. I mentioned just system and environmental, but it's important to kind of mention the actual word to show you have understood and you have learnt it from the specification, and try and link it to the context as much as possible. And like I say, try and be really careful about how you are linking it. Make sure it is a issue or benefit to the company, not to a customer, and state the obvious. Make it really clear what is that effect. And like I say, the company may not care about pollution, but they do care about reputation. So be really clear about those sort of things. And these questions are not marked by ticking off 8 points. They're marked more generally. The examiner is looking for how high level your answer is. But we can say we made 4 points here. Each one might be worth 2 marks. It gives us 8 marks. Even though it's not actually marked like this, an examiner will be thinking along those lines inevitably. You may well have written other points, as long as they're on a similar theme and are going from positive to negative and are mentioning at some point these different types of vulnerability, then that will be fine as well. This final scenario is just really an extension of our previous one for the final page of the paper. So the Board of Directors has asked for a monthly report comparing the electricity generated by PU with the usage of its customers. The board has also asked that online surveys are used to gather feedback from customers on the use of smart meters. This report does include statistical information, and this information will be presented using dynamic charts. And we need to explain one advantage to PU of using dynamic charts to present this statistical information for 3 marks. So we've got to be really careful how we explain this, because we want to drag out one advantage and explain it really carefully to get our 3 marks in total. So what is important here is to appreciate that it's not asking generally why a chart's good, it's asking why are dynamic charts good, not just any old chart, because a chart could be like a pie chart, like a bar chart. They are good charts because they're visual. It's better than just loads of numbers on a page, having a nice bar chart or a nice pie chart. But a normal pie chart, for example, doesn't change. Normally you make your pie chart with your colors maybe and like a key, and it doesn't change as new information comes in unless you make it a dynamic pie chart. In this case, if changes are made to the original data, like it's been a new month maybe, the pie chart will change based on this. So the actual segments maybe will change based on new data coming in. So why is this good? So I can put this into a more fluent sentence by saying there are automatic changes. Okay, so that'll give us a mark. Why is this a actual advantage to PU? Well, always stating the obvious. Well, first of all, no manual changes need to be made, as in somebody's not having to sit there and just change the pie chart every month, say. And why is that good? Well, it saves time. That'll give us a second mark, but what can we add to get our third mark? Well, thinking of our scenario, it mentions in our paragraph here, this wasn't wasted, this paragraph, because we're told it's about this board of directors. It's important they get the latest information. So we can say the board of directors will always get the latest information. Okay, so hopefully you can see those 3 distinct points. Really important we are answering it just specific to dynamic charts. Don't talk about how charts are nice and visual. That's true, but not specific to a dynamic chart in particular. It's a bit like how an integrated document changes. This is the same idea, if we link it correctly, that is. Okay, right, next one. So identify and explain 2 advantages to PU of using online surveys to gather feedback from its existing customers. Really important, again, I think it's the 3rd question running now. It's an advantage to PU itself. Important we don't talk about how it's good for customers or how it's good for the environment, it's how it's good for PU in particular. Well, why is having an online survey good for PU? Well, maybe thinking about paper. You could print out the survey and give it to customers. You pay for postage, you pay for the printing costs. Otherwise, you can just email the survey, which is free or is cheaper. So the cost advantage, right? So we can say the advantage, it is cheaper. And we need to explain this. So we can say, well, if it's on paper, we have to pay for postage and printing costs. Or if it's in person, having to conduct an interview or a consumer panel will be more expensive than sending it over email, for example. Okay, I'm sending it over email, for example. And a second advantage, well, maybe we could say analysis will be easier. So analysis of the responses will be easier. And why is this? Well, if you are doing it online, you can make sure your survey is set up in a way that all responses come in a nice standardized way. Maybe you are immediately processing responses into charts, maybe a dynamic chart. Maybe we are seeing our responses come in live. Whereas if you had to do it in person or had to do it on paper, you need to sift through all responses manually, and that might mean you have errors introduced, and it just takes a lot longer. So it'll be easier. Explanation is that responses can be input automatically, not by hand, or maybe not by hand is the wrong phrase, not manually reducing the time needed to do this. Okay, maybe these are not the greatest points in the world, but those are kind of the ideas we're going for, just expanding on our point when we're doing the explanation and being a little bit more specific about why exactly it is an advantage of online surveys in particular. Okay, going to our final question, which is always a relief when you get to this point, is to say, what is one other method, apart from online surveys, PU could use to gather feedback from its existing customers? So not a hard question really. What other methods do we have? Well, we could conduct interviews, we could have a hard copy survey. So let's just write it down. So why not hard copy survey or questionnaire? We could do a consumer panel. We could call them up on a phone. We could have a QR code linked to a rating system. Those sort of things are what we can mention for this question. Okay, so well done if you got this far. That's us done in this paper. This is not an easy paper by any means, the IT course is not easy to do, but a lot of questions are relying on how you can apply the answers to a scenario, which is really, really important. But as you would have seen, there's a lot to learn, and it's why it's so important you spend time learning the content. You cannot just go in and rely just on your common sense, because a lot of the questions are relying on you knowing very specific details, which you'd only know if you had spent time revising and learning content on the specification. So please, if you are preparing for this exam, spend time learning the stuff the exam would ask you to learn. Don't just think you can wing it, because you can't. But then as you go in, equally don't just rely on you recalling information. You must think on your feet a little bit and always link your answers to the scenario where it is relevant. If you haven't already, I would really recommend you spend time looking at other exam papers for this course. So practicing questions. If you've got a textbook, practice questions there too, because the questions can get quite similar, to be honest. And so the more practice you do, the more easy the exam will be, because it's not easy. And look, the exam is long, so in theory you have got this time, these 25 minutes potentially, to check it. It is so important before you relax after that last question. You go through your paper at least once, checking every single answer to make sure you haven't made any mistakes. You saw me make loads of mistakes and I had to check. I'm sure I've made some I've missed here. I have to check it because, you know, you're human, you make mistakes. Check you've answered the question, check you have linked it to the scenario where I asked you to, because you don't want to drop marks for just silly mistakes. So make sure you're checking every single answer before you close your paper and relax. Ideally you check it several times, and why not just add on stuff to longer mark questions, or just add on if you're not quite sure, because why not if you've got spare time at the end. So hopefully this video was useful, and I wish you all the best of luck in preparing for this exam.